বাবা আজকে হন্ডা সিটিটা নিয়ে যেতে পারবে? Hello everyone and welcome to the overview session of Design of Steel Structures taught by Professor Damodar Maiti. I am Srisha Chakraborty, one of the course teaching assistants. I am a PhD student at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. There are two broad branches of structural engineering: analysis and design. Analysis is the forward problem where we are given the structural dimensions, boundary conditions, and applied loads, and we have to find the response induced in the structure in terms of forces, stresses, deflections, and strains. Design is the inverse problem where we are given the loads to be withstood by the structure and some criteria on maximum deflection. So we are given the ultimate and serviceability limit states, and we have to find the optimum size of the structural elements and the materials and their connectivity and basically that. And analysis is also an important part in the design process, because in design we generally assume a cross assume a certain cross section connectivity material, and we carry out an analysis to the see whether the limit states are being satisfied, because we know the capacity from the cross section and we get the demand from analysis, because we are given the overall loads on the structure, and the load in each structural element, each type of load in each structural element we find out through analysis, and we see if the limit states are being satisfied. Then we can say the design is all right, otherwise we have to go back, propose a stronger section, larger section, and see again if it is being satisfied. So design is an iterative process which includes analysis in it. The first week we looked at steel as a material. So steel versus concrete, because that is the obvious question, because concrete is the most versatile and commonly used material for construction. So why do we use steel? Steel is much stronger than conventional concrete in both compression and tension. In tension it is many times higher, because concrete has virtually no strength in tension, but in compression as well steel is stronger. Steel also has a high strength to weight ratio, and it is very ductile compared to concrete. So it allows a lot of deformation before it fractures or collapses, giving us warning time for evacuation in case of like a very severe earthquake, or for repair work as well, which can help to save a lot of money. Steel, however, is much costlier than concrete, so we don't use it everywhere. It's used for very specific, like high demand structures like tall towers, long span bridges. We need design because the components individually and the entire structure should withstand the load throughout its lifespan, satisfying serviceability criteria. To properly design a structure, we have to ensure it is economical to construct without compromising safety. So that leads to a cost-effective design, and to do that, we need to have a good knowledge about the design procedure. Some mechanical properties of steel, which IS 800 2007, which is the Indian standard code for steel design. Some physical properties this code says that we can take it as more or less constant, irrespective of the grade of steel. That includes density, Young's modulus, Poisson's ratio, bulk modulus, and coefficient of thermal expansion. And the principal mechanical properties of the structural steel, which are important in design and which do vary with the grade of steel, are yield stress and ultimate stress. This is the stress strain or the elasticity curve of steel. So A zero, like the origin, if we call that O to A is a linear regime, then A to B is non-linear but within the elasticity limit. So up to B, if we remove the stress entirely, the strain will go to zero and the material will regain its original configuration. From B to C, it's not elastic, but you see that the slope is still quite high. At around C and D, the slope falls suddenly. So C or D or their middle or something, they are very close spaced. That is the yield point, and the stress corresponding to that corresponds to the Fy that we saw. After that, the slope falls, but still you can see that the stress is increasing. So yield stress, the structure has yielded, but it has not actually reached its capacity. The capacity comes here at the highest point where the stress is maximum. So this is the ultimate stress point. After that, the material flows and fractures. So C and ER are important points corresponding to Fy and Fu. These are the names of the points. A is the limit of proportionality, B is elastic limit, C and D are upper and lower yield points. E is ultimate and maximum tensile stress, and F is the fracture point. And these are some commonly used rolled steel sections that we use. The Bureau of Indian Standards publishes IS Handbook 1 that it tabulates unit weight per unit length, geometric dimensions, and other dimensions like the moment of inertia, the plastic modulus, the distance of the center of gravity from certain, like they measure it, they show it as a distance in the diagrams. Like for example, the center of gravity of this channel section will be somewhere here. So this distance they will mark in the diagram at the top of the page, and that distance cxx or czz, whatever we call it, it will be mentioned in the table. These are I sections, channel sections, angles, T's, hollow, and solid sections. Modes of failure in steel as a material or steel structures are bending, local buckling, shear buckling, web crushing and buckling, and lateral torsional buckling. All of these buckling modes of failure come because steel sections are generally very slender, so their cross sectional area is very small compared to the length. So that is where the buckling phenomenon comes, and the deflection is a serviceability limit state. Design philosophies. In week 2, we looked at design philosophies, primarily the working stress and the limit state method. The working stress method is a design approach in civil engineering. The theory is based on the idea of computing the stresses and strains in the structure. But here basically this is the main assumption. The working stress method operates under the assumption that both concrete and steel display linearly elastic behavior, where the stresses directly correlate with their corresponding strain. So, in other words, what the working stress method does is it assumes that Fy, the yield stress, is the maximum capacity of the material. So, beyond that, the graph that goes up and comes down again, it does not utilize that part at all. It ignores it completely. So, it just takes Fy as the ultimate capacity, which is a conservative assumption. Conservative means that if I am assuming that the structure is weaker than it actually is, I will give more material, give a stronger material. So it will eventually make the structure safer, or it will increase the reliability. But that is not the whole point, right? We want to utilize the entire behavior of the structure. We don't want to make it unnecessarily safe, in the sense then it will compromise on the cost of the structure, right? Because um, higher grade steel will cost more, or if we take larger cross sections it will cost more. So working stress method was eventually scrapped. So in this manner, the allowable stress values for concrete and steel are ascertained by concerting factor of safety. There are some advantages that it is very simple to apply working stress method, and it has been used for many years, and it is well known among engineers, construction professions, especially professionals, like the people who actually construct at the site, if they have been, they don't actually see, like they are not actually very, the laborers at the site, they are not particularly educated, they generally work on experience. So working stress method has been used by around the world for many decades from the beginning of civil engineering. So they find it more comfortable. They needed to switch at some point once the working stress method was removed. The method is generally conservative in nature, which means it tends to result in safer designs by considering lower allowable stresses. It also allows for easy comparison of the design with permissible limits, ensuring that the structure stays within safe limits. The working stress method can be easily integrated with IS codes and standards, and it is particularly suitable for designing simple and common structural elements like beams, columns, and slabs, because it is a very simple method. Like now, all the IS codes initially were following the working stress method. Now they have been, like in the past 15, 20 years, 25 years, all of them have been changed to the limit state. Like the IS 800 1984 was based on the working stress method, but the 2007 revision switches to the limit state method. So that increases the complicacy, but it also makes the structure more economical, so it is worth it. And there are disadvantages. The first disadvantage is the method doesn't fully consider the elastic behavior of materials, which can lead to potential underestimation of stress concentration and structural deformation. So not only does it give a conservative estimate, it might also give a wrong estimate, because if I'm not taking the if I'm not capturing the behavior of the structure in my design, I'm assuming that after yield stress, it completely fractures, but it is not. It is actually there is some other behavior going on. The stress is increasing, the strain is increasing rapidly. So all those deformations are not getting, no, we are not considering them, because that is happening. It is not actually fracturing. So we cannot, like, taking a limited behavior of the structure does not only result in conservative estimate, it can also underestimate some other phenomena like stress concentration, structural deformation. While conservatism is a merit, it can also be a demerit, as it might result in over designed structures, leading to increased material and construction costs. The method's reliance on allowable stresses can make it sensitive to variations in material properties. So, okay, all of these, it is unsuitable for complex structures and situations involving nonlinear behavior, dynamic loads, unique loading condition, and so on. Limit state method, on the other hand, it is a it considers all the relevant conditions. The strength limit states are based on load carrying capacity of the structure, which includes buckling, fatigue, fracture, etc. Serviceability limit states are based on performance of the structure under the actual application of service loads and includes deflection, vibration, corrosion. The loads at working conditions are factored by the use of partial safety factors for loads. So both the loads and the loads also have a partial factor of safety being multiplied, and the strength or the capacity also has a partial safety factor in the denominator. So ultimately, the limit state corresponding to each mode of failure comes out to be this: the design action should be less than or equal to the design strength. Advantages are that it logically deals with the fact that there always exists a possibility of variations in loads. So basically, what does the factor of safety do? It accounts for unexpected loading. When we are taking a particular load in a design, this is what I am expecting, but I also accept that I cannot predict the future completely. So let me take a factor of safety. I multiply the load by 1.5 to account for variations. If there is a sudden increase in our expected load, for example, you are designing a building of suppose a mall for a certain amount of dead load, but one day there is some event or a concert and the crowd is extremely high. So there are so many people, and then the load might exceed what we were expecting. So that is what this factor of safety accounts for. The method also gives different weightages to different loads and materials. So in the IS, it's wait the IS 875. IS 875 part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of these account for a certain, like they cover a certain type of load: dead load, live load, wind load, earthquake load. And all of the partial safety factors in all the loads and all the load combinations are not same. There is a lot of research going on between, there has been a lot of research going on with behind these codes. So there are different factors of safeties as well. uh, Disadvantages: there is a likelihood of design errors because of the more complex theory, which are not so in the working stress method. And but limit state method is a far better than other design philosophies, which is why most of the codes around the world, most of the design codes currently follow the limit state method. Bolted connections, and for week 3, 4, and 5, we looked at bolted connections and welded connections. Connections are integral parts of any steel structures which have a major role in overall integrity. The standard parts are properly connected to create steel structures. So for steel buildings or steel structures, the roll sections are shipped from the industry, and in the site they have to be assembled. So that assembly considered, for example, a beam column junction. In concrete, the entire thing is cast as a whole into a formwork. So automatically the connection is incorporated there because it is an integrated structure that is being built. But in steel, we have one I section, another I section, let's say, and I want to create a beam column junction, and I assume it is perfectly fixed. I don't allow movement. Commonly in beam column junctions, we do not allow the movement to be free. So I have to create a very good rigid connection there, which does not allow the movement. So that is what the connections do. I will give bolts or welds through gusset plates, maybe, if it is not possible to connect directly. So that is why connections are used. Connections make up a large amount of the cost of structural steel. Connection design should be given top priority for both safety and structural economy. Bolts and welds look like this. Bolted connections basically method to join structural components with the help of bolts. They are simple to use and don't require any extra equipment. Process for establishing a bolted connection involves these steps. But these are just theoretical. You won't need it for exams, or even practically, because you are not going to go and bolt it. But you should just have some idea about how it is done. Advantages: it is simple. It has an easy operation, low cost, low noise, less time, less manpower, and less skilled labor. Welding requires skilled labor. Availability is easy, and it is a non-permanent joint. This is an important factor, because suppose there has been an earthquake where the structure did not collapse, but there has been damage to the structure. So after that, what we have to do is we have to restore the structure. So we have to the structure might need to undergo major repair. For that, we see that the joints have deformed, but if it is a bolted connection, we can just disconnect the bolt and we can still repair there. But if it is a weld, because weld is a direct competitor of bolt, because bolt versus weld is where we are seeing these advantages and disadvantages. For welds, we have to remove the entire part and replace it instead. For bolts, it is a non-permanent joint, so it is easier to replace, and no risk of heating operation. Disadvantages: accuracy of joints depends on tightening, less axial tensile strength, high effect of vibration, more weight because it is a separate unit being attached. Unlike weld, which is just a bit of parent material, proper lubrication requires protection against corrosion. Types of bolts: lap joints and butt joints. Lap joints are where the two members to be connected are overlapping. So here, two members are overlapping and we just bolt it. Butt joint requires a cover plate, some kind of cover plate, because if you put the members end to end, you can't bolt them. So you need some plate on top or on bottom or on both sides for the bolting to be possible. So this is a single bolted lap joint. This is a single single cover double bolted butt joint. This is a cover. These are the lines of bolts are determine whether it's single or double jointed. Welded connections. Welding is a procedure of joining two metal portions in the molten state of with or without pressure. Electric arc welding is commonly used, which everyone would have seen sometime in construction sites. That sparky thing that people do with some eye protection. That is electric arc welding. Part of the metal to be welded is melted by using an electric arc or oxyacetylene flame along with a weld rod. So the weld rod is basically what is melting the melted molten material. Arc heat will melt both the metal part and rod at the same time, and then fusion happens as welding rod material flows across the arc, and when it cools and solidifies again. Joint efficiency is 100%. Fabrication is in difficult structure is easy. Pure silence prevails during process, even though small sound is heard during oxyacetylene welding. But for during bolting, especially the drilling part, it's a very you would have heard it's a very annoying grating noise when drilling is going on, because before bolting you need to drill the bolt holes. Welding process is faster. It is also economical, but also it also gives minimum self weight for structure. But disadvantages, it is a more skilled process, so it has a chance of going wrong. Welded structures are subjected to cracks due to non-provision of expansion and contraction. Very high labor cost since skilled labor is required. Checking and verification of welding work is very difficult. Structure may be subjected to fatigue and susceptible to failure by cracking under repeated cyclic loads. Butt weld and fillet weld. Butt weld is when the plates are placed end to end, and fillet weld is when they are placed perpendicularly. Eccentric connections. Eccentric connections is a simple connection is when the applied load passes through the center of gravity of the connection. So here there are two bolts, two four this side, four this side. So along this line, the center of gravity is here somewhere between this and this bolt, and the force is also along this line. So this is a simple connection. This is an eccentric connection. So if the force is in this sense, in this direction, the center of gravity is this, right. This is the center of gravity, and the load is being applied here. So this transverse shift of the center application of load and the center of gravity is called the eccentricity E. And some connections subjected to eccentric shear are seat connections, framed connections, bracket connection, etc. Then in week 6 and 7, we looked at tension members. In a tension member, pulling forces are applied in opposite direction at the two ends of a member, which you can understand intuitively. The bending stresses in tension member due to self weight are not taken into consideration. However, in case eccentricity exists in the member due to the fact that the member is not perfectly straight or there exists eccentricity in connections, then in that case, flexural stress have to be considered. Strength of the tension member gets adversely affected due to the presence of nuts, bolts, and pins at connection, due to shear lag, reversal of stresses, and obviously due to reduction of cross-sectional area. It is obvious that tension, if there is a plate and you are applying a tension, the cross-section that comes into play is the thickness into the width. But if there is a bolt hole, then that part of the width has to be subtracted, and you know that for lesser cross-section area, the stress will be higher. Plus, there is also some stress concentration around the bolt hole, which I'll show here. So this is the stress profile. Green is the so red, and like it's a contour plot where the green is will correspond to the least magnitude, and then the blues, and then the reds and the yellow and red. So around the bolt hole you can see there is a stress concentration, and in the rest of the plate the stress will be generally the force divided by the width into the thickness. So F divided by D into T. But around the bolt hole it is not just if if the cross-section area is not just the width minus bolt hole into T, there is also an extra stress concentration with some stress concentration factor. So these all have to be taken into account, especially when there is some kind of drilling. The presence of bolt rivet pinholes influences stress distribution at the section, which is what I was saying. But the critical tensile stress in a tension member occurs at the section where the cross-section area is the minimum. So this is the critical section here because it is passing through two bolt holes. Here it is one. Types of tension members: wire and cable. This is in suspension bridges. These wires are under tension. They transfer the load to these piers or abutments, which are under compression, and which transfers it to the foundation and soil. Rods and bars used in lightly loaded structures like roof trusses. You know that when we analyze a truss, we generally get some of the members. Trusses are made of two force members, so each of them are either under tension or compression. So generally, the magnitude of tension and compression in these roof trusses is not very high, but they are still tension or compression members after all. So that those are also tension members. The ones after solving the truss, the ones where we get tension, flat plates and flat bars, roll sections and built-up sections. Types of failure in tension member: yielding of gross section, rupture of net section, and block shear failure. Yielding of gross section, this type of failure, wherein the yielding of the gross section occurs, a significant amount of deformation occurs before the material actually gets fractured. So this deformation makes the structure unserviceable. So here we take the Fy, the yield stress, as the capacity here, because it is not this is limit state design, but we still take Fy here because here we are concerned about the yield after yielding. We saw in that graph, right, that the slope falls. So that means that the even for a small increase in amount of stress, strain rapidly increases and the serviceability of the structure gets hampered. So here we are concerned with the gross section yielding. We are not concerned with the gross section actually failing, because even before that the structure will become unserviceable. Rupture of net section, on the other hand, is a fracture mode of failure. So here we take the Fu, or the ultimate stress. When the net section of a member reaches the ultimate stress, then rupture or fracture of member takes place. And block shear failure is a completely different kind of failure. It happens when the bearing strength of steel and the bolts are very strong. What happens is, when it is undergoing tension, then this entire block just shears off. A segment of the block of the material at the corner of the connection shears out due to possible high bearing strength of steel and high strength of bolts. Then in week 8 and 9, we looked at compression members. A member that predominantly carries compressive forces on the two ends is called a compression member. An ideal compression member is perfectly straight. It has no crookedness or other imperfection. Loads are applied uniformly across the section. Center of gravity of loads coincides with the center of gravity of the member. Types of compression members: columns, posts, struts, booms. Struts are those are the lightly loaded compression members in trusses, like in the roof trusses. These are the column-like structures. These are some compression members in trusses, and this is a crane or a boom. Design aspect of compression member: here stability plays an important role. It is not just in tension, we only were concerned about the ultimate or the yielding capacity of the material, right? But in compressive members, if that Fy or Fu is not the only thing we are concerned about, we are also concerned about the stability, because the, the compression under compression, steel sections, slender steel sections tend to buckle, and if the buckle, even without actual failing of the material, the structure, I have to say, has failed, because instability is a failure mode. So length of a member also governs design. Again, in tension members, length never came into play. We are only concerned with the cross section and the material. But here we are concerned about the length as well, because the slenderness ratio depends on the length. Slenderness ratio is defined based on whether the column is short, intermediate, or long. So there are some differentiating criteria in the IS codes which you have to follow. Lacing holds various members of compression members straight, parallel, and at a correct distance apart in order to distribute the stress uniformly between the various parts. Lacing generally consists of flats or angle sections. Lacing bars must not project beyond the column section. Single and double lacing system. So this is a single lacing system, and double lacing is like this kind, when there is one going this way, one another set of lacing going this way. Batten plates. Plates or any other roll sections used to connect main components of the compression member, placed opposite to each other on two parallel faces and must be spaced or proportioned uniformly. The number of battens should be such that compression member is divided into at least three bays within its actual length. So that there should be at least three bays. That means end battens and two intermediate battens. They will divide the member into three bays. That is the minimum. Strength of batten column is similar to laced column, but economically not viable, so they are not really used much. End batten, intermediate batten. These are the end battens, and these are all the intermediate battens. Okay. Week 10, we had a class yesterday, and week 11 will be next Tuesday. The topic that there is steel beams. Steel beams are these are beams. They are in a steel structure. These beams are steel beams. Beam design. The beams must be adequately proportioned for strength in bending, taking into consideration local and lateral instability of the compression flange, necessary shear strength and bearing resistance of beam section, sufficient stiffness, keeping in view that deflections and deformations are within limits specified under service load conditions. Economy by paying attention to the grade of steel to yield. Beam design. Now we have to see the design criteria. What is the design objective? Objective is achieving the optimum bending resistance. We know that beams generally fail under bending. Shear is not that important, not often the governing criteria. The beam material must be displaced off from the neutral axis as far as possible to have large amount of moment of inertia of beam section, which is moment of inertia is a property that resists bending. So that is, I want to maximize the moment of inertia for a same cross sectional area. Web area must be sufficient enough to have adequate shear resistance. As I said yesterday, generally the flanges are wider and far spaced from the neutral axis, like far away, because this neutral axis about the major axis. So flanges are the parts that generally take most of the bending, and the web generally takes most of the shear. That is how we design it for. There are some challenges like lateral buckling of beam or buckling of compression flange or web. So this lateral buckling of beam depends on whether I laterally restrain the beam or not. So that leads to two different methods of design, whether the beam is laterally restrained or not. Increasing depth increases flexural resistance but reduces resistance to lateral or web buckling. Types of beam sections. This is an I section. This is an I section with two plates. This is a built-up section completely. So it has one plate here and two plates here acting as flanges. This is a plate with four angle sections bolted to it, also pretending like seeming like an I section. And this is a heavily reinforced section with one plate and a completely built-up section. One plate here, four angles, then again two plates. Yes, there can be various types. Laterally restrained or unrestrained beams. Laterally restrained beams can fail by reaching the plastic moment if it can remain stable up to the fully plastic condition. But in laterally unrestrained beam, the failure occurs by lateral torsional buckling. Then the whole beam may buckle laterally between the supports, and the capacity has not been reached. The plastic moment capacity has not been reached, but the beam torsionally like buckles up between the supports. That is an instability condition, and just like in compression members, we have to say that it has failed. A laterally restrained beam will fail by yielding if beam is short, elastic buckling if beam is long, and inelastic lateral buckling if beam is of intermediate length. Column this, okay, so that will be covered in the last class. That will be next to next Tuesday. So, are there any questions? If there are no questions, you can leave. I'll wait for some time to. Okay. Thank you for attending.